You have 30 seconds to move that car or I move it for you. She didn't even blink. Adriana Romano, 38 years old, 47 euros in her bank account, and every nerve in her body running on cold coffee and stubbornness, crossed her arms and looked straight at the man in the black SUV, the man whose name made Naples go quiet, the man 3 bodyguards called sir, the man who had never, not once in his life, been told no by anyone who wanted to keep breathing. She told him no. He smirked. Slow, dangerous, almost admiring. Stubborn, dinner, tomorrow, 8 o'clock. Subscribe now, drop your city below. Let's see how far this story goes. The morning Adriana Romano's life changed forever started the way most catastrophic mornings do, with a parking spot. She had been awake since 4:53, not by choice. Her downstairs neighbor had been fighting with someone on the phone. The walls in her building were approximately the thickness of a piece of notebook paper, and by the time the argument downstairs ended, her alarm had already gone off. She had lain in bed for 6 minutes staring at the ceiling, doing the math she did every morning, rent overdue invoices, the client who still hadn't paid for the logo she'd finished 8 weeks ago, and arrived at the same answer she always arrived at. Not enough, not yet, but almost. She was a designer, good enough that people hired her, not yet good enough that she could afford to lose a single client, a single meeting, a single hour. So she was out the door by 6:45 with a portfolio bag that weighed as much as a small child, a coffee that was already losing the battle against the morning air, and a presentation she had rehearsed 11 times in her bathroom mirror. She circled the block twice. The streets of Naples in the morning, there were a full-contact sport, delivery trucks parked sideways across lanes, motorbikes threading through gaps. No sane person would attempt everyone late, everyone horn-happy, everyone absolutely certain their urgency outranked yours. And then a space. Right there. Narrow, slightly lopsided, technically a spot. She exhaled, pulled in, cut the engine, sat for exactly 2 seconds in the private relief of someone who has won a very small battle in a very long war. Then she heard the horn. One long, flat, deliberate note. Not the frantic honk of someone who'd startled. Not a warning. A statement. Move. She looked in her rear-view mirror. The SUV was black enormous, and sitting so close to her rear bumper, she couldn't have slid a hand between them. Tinted windows. No plates she could read from this angle. The horn sounded again, same length, same flat authority. Adriana picked up her coffee, took a sip, set it down. She got out of the car. She walked to the driver's window and knocked. One knock. Firm. The window came down. He was not what she expected. She had built a picture in the 10 seconds it took her to walk over some middle-aged businessman red in the face, the kind of man who yelled at waiters and thought that was power. Instead, she got someone composed. Still. Dark hair going silver at the temples. A jaw that looked like it had been argued with before and had never once lost. He was looking at her the way a chess player looks at the board, not with irritation but with interest, calculating what the piece in front of him was going to do. "This is my spot," Adriana said. "It was available when I signaled," he said. His voice was even, almost bored. "I was already pulling in when you signaled. You were still moving. I was committed. To what intimidating me out of a parking space?" Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not offense. Something closer to amusement, which was worse. "I don't intimidate people over parking spaces. You're doing a convincing impression of someone who does." The man in the passenger seat, she noticed him now. Large, quiet, the kind of quiet that was professional, turned his head slightly toward the driver. Some wordless communication passed between them. The driver didn't acknowledge it. "I have a meeting," Adriana said. "I was here first. I'd like you to move." "I have somewhere to be as well," the man said. "I'd like you to move." "Then we have a problem." "We do," he agreed. He reached for his phone. "What are you doing?" "Making a call." "About a parking spot." He glanced up. "About several things." And he started typing. Adriana stood on the cobblestones and watched this man, this suit-wearing, bodyguarded, completely unbothered man, handle his phone with the focused calm of someone who had never once in his life been inconvenienced for longer than he chose to be. Around them, the street had begun to take notice. A woman with a shopping cart had slowed down. 2 men outside the cafe across the street had turned to watch. One of them recognized the SUV. She could tell by the way his posture changed the small, involuntary pull backward. She kept her eyes on the driver. "Sir, Carlo," he said without looking up. "I don't need your name." "You asked." "I didn't ask, Art. You were about to." He looked up then. "Carlo Ferretti. And you're Adriana Romano. You run a design studio out of the building on this block. You've been operating independently for 4 years. Your last major client was a restaurant group on Via Toledo." He paused. "You're currently behind on rent." The world stopped. Not the street. The street kept going the horn from somewhere down the road, the espresso machine in the cafe, the pigeons. But something in Adriana Romano's chest went completely icily silent. "How?" she said, very carefully. "Do you know that?" He turned his phone around. Her own website stared back at her. Her headshot. Her name. Below it, information she had never put on her website, her building address, her landlord's name, a number she recognized immediately as her current outstanding balance. "You had someone run a background check," she said, "in the last 4 minutes. 3, he said. On me, over a parking spot. I like to know who I'm dealing with." That, she said, her voice dropping to something quiet and careful, is not normal behavior. Most people find it efficient. Most people would find it terrifying. He tilted his head. "Are you terrified?" She looked at him, held the look for 3 full seconds. "No," she said. "I'm furious. There's a difference." For the first time, a flicker. Brief. Real. His expression shifted in a way that wasn't calculation or amusement or boredom. It was something she couldn't name yet, didn't have the vocabulary for, because she'd only known this man for 4 minutes. He looked back at his phone, typed something, then said without looking up, "Dinner tomorrow, 8 o'clock. Adriana blinked. "I'm sorry, Mom." "That's my arrangement." He glanced up. "You keep the spot, I get dinner." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight to it. "You're not serious," she said. "I'm always serious." "You're blackmailing me with a parking space." "Negotiating," he corrected. "There's a difference." "There really isn't." He set his phone down on his lap and looked at her directly for the first time with nothing filtering it, no performance, no calculation. Just looked at her. "You didn't move," he said. "When I honked, when I sat here, when my associate, a slight nod toward the passenger seat, made his presence obvious. You didn't move. It's my spot." "That's not why," he said. "People move when they're scared. You weren't scared, you were angry. That's different." "I'm still angry." "I know." He almost smiled. "Not quite." "Il Marinello, Via Partenope, 8 o'clock. Tell them my name at the door." "I'm not coming to dinner with you." He picked up his phone again, started to dial. "Then I'll need the spot." She stopped, stared. "You're going to call someone to take my parking space." "I own the building at the end of this block," he said simply. "I own the line attached to it. This street is technically..." He paused, consulting something on his phone. "Yes, it's on an easement that runs through my property line. So technically, you're making that up." He turned the phone around again. A property document, a lot map, a name at the top she could read clearly, Ferretti Holdings. Adriana looked at the document, looked at him, looked back at the document. "You own this street, a portion of it, and you're using that to steal my parking spot." "I'm using it," he said, "to secure dinner with the only person who's argued with me for this long, since..." He paused. "Actually, I'm not sure anyone has argued with me this long." The 2 men outside the cafe were openly staring now. The woman with the shopping cart had stopped pretending to check her phone. Adriana Romano stood on those cobblestones in the June morning air and made a decision so fast it didn't feel like a decision. It felt like gravity. "Fine," she said. He looked up. "Dinner," she said. "One dinner. I eat, we talk, I leave. And you never run a background check on me again." He studied her for a moment, then quiet and completely certain. "You win, Adriana Romano. The spot is yours." He rolled up the window. The SUV, reversed smoothly, pulled out into the street and was gone. Adriana stood very still for a moment. Then she turned, walked back to her Fiat, opened the door, sat down, and said to her steering wheel, What did I just agree to? She told herself she wasn't going for the rest of the day. She told her client Paolo Santoro, who was attempting to explain why his 3-week-old boutique hotel needed a complete rebrand in 10 days, that she was fully focused on his project. She told her bank account, which had not improved since morning, that she was being sensible. She told her best friend Julia over the phone at 7:30 that evening that it was just dinner, it meant nothing. She was going purely for information gathering. Information gathering, Julia said. Yes. From the man who owns part of your street. From a potential client. He's in real estate. Adriana. What? You looked up Carlo Ferretti the second you got upstairs. Silence. Didn't you? Julia said. He's in real estate finance development and several things that aren't listed publicly, Adriana said. He sits on 3 city boards. He opened that hotel in Positano that won the architecture award 2 years ago. And Tia, she paused. Apparently there was a whole article about him in a business magazine where they called him the most powerful man in Naples that most people have never heard of. And you argued with him about a parking spot. It was my spot. Adriana, baby, honey, the love of my life. Julia's voice had taken on the tone she used when she was somewhere between horrified and delighted. What are you going to wear? She wore a navy dress, simple. The kind that said, I'm civil, I'm leaving. Marinello had no prices on the menu. That was the first thing she noticed. The second thing was that the maitre d' said her name when she walked in, Signorina Romano. Of course, this way without her saying a word, which meant Carlo had not only made a reservation, but described her, and that was an unsettling thing to absorb while following a man in a white jacket through a restaurant where every table was whispering. Carlo stood when she approached. She hadn't expected that. It was such a simple thing, just rising to his feet, and it threw her completely off the script she'd been running in her head for the last 12 hours. You actually came, he said. Don't do that, she said. Do what? Sound surprised. You knew I'd come. He held out her chair. She moved around it and sat on her own. He sat across from her without missing a beat, like her ignoring the gesture was perfectly expected. Maybe it was. You read about me, he said. I did research before a meeting. That's normal. What you found didn't scare you away. What I found, she said, meeting his eyes, made me more confused about why you care about a parking space. The ghost of a smile. What did you find? Enough. She set her napkin on her lap. Your turn. Why me? And I want the real answer, not the one about how I stood my ground. You could find someone who stands their ground on any corner in this city. He was quiet for a moment, actually quiet the way people are when they're deciding how honest to be, not performing deliberation, doing it. I saw you before, he said. The parking spot wasn't the first time. Adriana went still. When? 6 months ago, a gallery on Via Toledo. You were presenting work for a client. He paused. A man in an Armani suit told you your color palette was wrong. She remembered. Immediately, viscerally, she remembered the gallery owner, the smug certainty on his face, the way everyone in the room had braced for her to back down. I told him he was confidently wrong, she said slowly. In front of 11 people, including the client paying you. Carlo's voice was even. You didn't whisper it. You didn't soften it. You said it clearly, waited for him to respond, and when he doubled down, you said, he paused, and she realized with a lurch that he had the exact words, being certain and being right are not the same thing. The palette stays. The room seemed to tilt slightly. You were there, she said. I was there as you. Why didn't you come? You were working, he said simply, and you didn't need the interruption. She stared at him. You remembered that? For 6 months. I remember things that are worth remembering. I'm a freelance designer with 47 euros in my checking account. She stopped. His expression didn't change. You know how much is in my account? I know approximately. That was in your background check this morning. Yes. And you still thought I was worth, she gestured vaguely at the restaurant, the candles, the complete absence of prices on the menu. This. The number in your account, Carlo said, has nothing to do with what you're worth. He said it the way someone states a fact about temperature or distance, not a compliment, a correction. The man in the Armani suit had considerably more in his account, and he was wrong about the palette. Adriana picked up her wine glass because she needed something to do with her hands, took a sip, set it down precisely. "What do you want from me, Carlo?" she asked. "Not the parking version, the real version." He looked at her for a long moment. The candle between them made the shadows move. Somewhere behind her, a couple laughed a full, unself-conscious sound. The restaurant breathed around them. "I want to find out," he said, "if you're as interesting across a dinner table as you are in a street argument." And so far, he said, the answer is yes. She hated that this landed the way it did. She hated that she felt it in her sternum, that warm, reckless shift of something she had been very carefully managing for a very long time. She was a practical woman. She dealt in facts, in invoices and color palettes, in the clean logic of design. She did not get unsettled by powerful men in expensive restaurants who had spent 6 months thinking about her without saying a word. She was absolutely unsettled. "I have conditions," she said. "Tell me. No more background checks. If you want to know something about me, you ask." "Agreed. If this," she gestured between them, "is going somewhere, it goes at my pace, not yours." Something shifted in his expression. Not resistance. Something more like respect, and the fact that it looked involuntary made it mean more. "Agreed, Imja." And she said, "If you ever use your ownership of that easement to threaten my parking spot again, I will find a lawyer who specializes in exactly that situation, and I will make your life extremely complicated." Carlo looked at her for a moment. Then he did something she hadn't seen him do yet. He laughed, full and real and completely without calculation, a laugh that made him look 10 years younger and 100 times more dangerous, because underneath all the composure and the property documents and the name that made men step back there was apparently a person, an actual laughing human person. "Agreed," he said, "all three." She nodded, picked up her menu, then set it down again. "The palate was right," she said. "I know," he said. "I hired the hotel myself 6 months later." Adriana stared. "The one on Via Toledo? The one that rebranded and won the Regional Design Award?" He nodded once. "That was my palette," she said. "The gallery owner claimed credit," Carlo said. "But yes, I saw the original presentation. I knew whose work it was." The words landed like stones dropped into still water, each one sending rings outward. 6 months. The palette, the award, his name on the property down the street from her studio, the parking spot this morning. "You engineered this morning," she said very quietly. He held her gaze, did not look away, did not confirm, did not deny, and somehow that silence was the most honest thing he'd said all night. Adriana Romano looked at this man across the candle-lit table of a restaurant she'd never been able to afford in a city she'd been fighting to survive in for 4 years, and felt the ground shift beneath her in a way that had nothing to do with the wine. She picked up her glass. He picked up his. "You're going to be a problem," she said. "Almost certainly," he agreed. They drank. Outside, Naples hummed on. And somewhere in the back of her mind, the sensible, practical invoice counting, part of Adriana Romano, was already raising its hand with a long list of very important objections. She told it firmly and clearly to sit down. She didn't sleep that night. Not really. She lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling and replayed the last thing Carlo Ferretti had said before she left the restaurant. Almost certainly the 2 words sitting in her chest like a splinter she couldn't locate well enough to pull out. She had walked home. 40 minutes on foot through the warm Naples night, turning down his offer of a car because she needed the air and the distance and the clear physical sensation of her own 2 feet on the ground to remind herself who she was. Adriana Romano, freelance designer, studio apartment, 47 euros, no one's romantic interest, no one's project. She repeated it like a list, like a grocery list, something functional and grounding, and completely resistant to the image of him laughing that real unguarded laugh she hadn't expected that kept appearing every time she almost fell asleep. By 6 in the morning, she gave up, made coffee, and opened her laptop. There was an email from Paolo Santorovo about the hotel rebrand asking for a preliminary concept by Friday. There was a payment notification finally from the restaurant group on Via Toledo. And there was one more email from an address she didn't recognize sent at 11:47 the night before. The subject line was blank. The body contained 4 words and a file attachment. "Thought you should know." She opened the attachment. It was a scanned document, a lease agreement, Her lease agreement for her studio space on the ground floor of her building, the space where she worked and met clients, and had spent 4 years building something from nothing. She knew every line of it. She had read it so many times in the beginning that she could recite the termination clauses in her sleep. But this was not her copy. This was a copy from the landlord's files, with a handwritten note in the margin dated 3 days ago in handwriting she didn't recognize. Transfer to FH Holdings pending. Standard 90-day notice to follow. FH Holdings, Ferretti Holdings. Adriana sat very still for 37 seconds. She counted them. Then she closed the laptop, put on her shoes, walked downstairs, got in her Fiat, and drove. She didn't have his number. She had never asked for it, and he had never offered it. And last night, that had felt like a kind of power. She would contact him when she chose to on her terms. Now it felt like a miscalculation. She drove to the address she'd found in her research the night before the offices of Ferretti Holdings, a building on the waterfront that was exactly as composed and deliberately intimidating as its owner, parked in a spot she didn't check was legal, and walked through the front door. The woman at the reception desk looked up with a professional smile that became something more cautious when Adriana said, "I need to see Carlo Ferretti." "Do you have an appointment?" "No." "Mr. Ferretti's schedule." "Tell him Adriana Romano is here," she said. "Tell him it's about FH Holdings and a lease transfer. Tell him I'll wait." She sat down. She did not take out her phone. She did not look around. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight and her heart going at about twice its normal rate, and she waited. 4 minutes later, the receptionist said, "Ms. Romano, he'll see you now." She had expected to be kept waiting longer. The 4 minutes rattled her more than an hour would have. It meant he'd been expecting this. His office was on the top floor. She didn't let herself register anything about the room except him, standing by the window jacket off sleeves rolled to the elbows, holding a coffee cup, like a man who had been at work for hours already. He turned when she came in. "You found the email," he said. "Did you send it?" "No." "But you knew about it." A pause. "Sit down, Adriana. I'd rather stand. Did you buy my building?" "Ferretti Holding has acquired the property group that owns your building," he said, "as part of a larger portfolio deal. It was finalized 2 weeks ago." 2 weeks ago, 4 days before the parking spot. "You already owned my street when you argued with me yesterday morning." "Yes." "And you didn't think that was—" She stopped. Chose the next word very carefully. "Relevant. I didn't know you worked in that ad building until I ran the check yesterday morning. And you expect me to believe that?" "I don't expect anything," and he said. "It's what happened." She looked at him, tried to read the architecture of his face, what was true, what was managed, what was performance. He was very good at composure. She was beginning to understand that composure was both his greatest asset and his most effective weapon. "What's in that margin note?" she said. "Standard 90-day notice. What does that mean for my lease?" He set down his coffee. "It means the previous owner flagged your unit for commercial conversion. Under the old management, your lease would have been terminated at the end of the notice period. And under you, silence. Carlo." His name in her mouth, direct and stripped of everything soft. "Under you." "That depends," he said, "on what you want." "What I want," she said very quietly, "is for my business not to be used as leverage in whatever this is." She gestured between them, the same gesture she'd made last night at the restaurant, but it meant something different now. It meant, "Be careful what you call this, because I'm reconsidering every word. If you want to have dinner with me, ask me. If you want to fund my work, we have a professional conversation. But I am not someone you maneuver into a corner and call it a negotiation." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, Naples glittered 20 stories below. She didn't look. She kept her eyes on him and, "Your lease will not be terminated," he said. "I had that flagged for review the day the acquisition closed, 2 weeks ago, before yesterday." She absorbed this. "Prove it." He crossed to his desk, pulled a folder already there, it was already open like he'd had it ready, handed it to her. Inside was an internal memo dated 11 days ago with his signature at the bottom and a single instruction: residential and active commercial leases in this portfolio are to be honored in full. No terminations without my direct authorization. 11 days ago. She looked at the date twice. This doesn't explain the margin note, she said. The previous property manager wrote that before the sale closed. Before my memo. He no longer works for us. She closed the folder, handed it back, said nothing. Adriana, I need a minute, she said. He gave her one. Didn't fill the silence with reassurance or explanation, or the kind of words men use when they're trying to manage a situation back under control. He just waited. She was beginning to notice that about him he could wait without it costing him anything, which meant either he was extraordinarily patient or he had so much power that urgency had simply never been required of him. Both options were their own kind of unsettling. Who sent me that email? She asked. Someone who wanted you to be angry at me this morning, he said. There are people who don't like that I'm moving into this portfolio, people who would prefer I was distracted. By me. By the situation, he said. By you specifically, they did their research too, it seems. She felt the full shape of it land then, not just a parking spot, not just a dinner. Someone had studied her, found her lease, found the flag note, and sent it at midnight to make sure she woke up furious and came here and made a scene. And she had. She had walked straight into it. I'm being used, she said flatly. Someone tried to use you, he said. That's different. Not from where I'm standing. No, he said. I suppose not. He said it without defense, which she hadn't expected, and it disarmed her in a way that 100 explanations wouldn't have. She sat down, not because he'd asked her to, because her knees made the decision before her pride could intervene. She sat in the chair across from his desk and pressed her hands flat on her thighs and looked at the floor for a moment. Tell me the truth, she said. Not the managed version. The real one. He sat in the chair beside her, not behind the desk beside her, and she noticed that too. I acquired this portfolio because it's valuable. I didn't know you worked here until yesterday. The dinner last night was not a business move. The parking spot was not staged. He paused. I cannot prove any of that to you. I can only tell you. She looked at him. And the email, I have people looking into it. By tonight, I'll know who sent it. And then what? And then I'll deal with it. Something about the way he said those 5 words flat, certain, and completely without drama made her very aware that deal with it meant something different coming from him than it would coming from most people. She filed this away. She was beginning to keep a mental file on Carlo Ferretti, and it was getting complicated. I don't want to be protected, she said. I know. And I don't want to be managed. I know that too. Then what, she said, do you actually want from me? Because yesterday it was dinner and a conversation. This morning it's property law and anonymous emails and people using me to get to you, and I'd like to understand what exactly I've walked into. He was quiet, not evasively thoughtfully. I don't know yet, he said, and it was the most honest thing he'd said to her in 2 days. She could feel the honesty of it, the way it didn't come wrapped in anything, didn't arrive with justification. That's not a great answer, she said. No, he agreed, but it's the true one. She exhaled slowly, looked at her hands, looked back at him. I have a presentation for a client on Friday. I need my studio to be standing for it. It will be. And I need to not receive any more anonymous emails at midnight. Working on it, she stood up. He stood with her, that automatic courtesy again. If something like this happens again, she said, something that involves me, my work, my business, I need you to tell me before I find out on my own. Can you do that? He looked at her steadily. Yes. Okay. She picked up her bag. Then we're fine for now. She was at the door when he said, Adriana. She stopped, turned. I'm sorry, he said, for this morning. You shouldn't have woken up to that. She looked at him, this man who had probably apologized to fewer people in his life than she could count on one hand, and who said it now without ceremony, without softening, just the plain words. No, she said, I shouldn't have. She pushed the door open. But here we are. She left. In the elevator going down, she realized her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the sustained effort of holding herself together at full tension for the last 45 minutes without letting any of it show. She pressed her back against the elevator wall and breathed and let herself shake for exactly the 11 floors it took to reach the lobby. Then she straightened up, walked out, got in her Fiat. Her phone rang before she reached the first intersection. Julia. You went to his office, Julia said without greeting. How did you? Because I know you, and because you just drove past my cafe and you had your "I've done something I'm processing" face. A pause. Pull over. Adriana pulled over, parked, stared at the windshield. Talk, Julia said. She talked. All of it, the email, the lease, the memo dated 11 days ago, the conversation in his office, the apology she hadn't expected. Julia listened without interrupting, which was unusual enough to be its own measure of seriousness. When Adriana finished, Julia said, "He had the memo 11 days ago." "Yes." "Before the parking spot, before the dinner." "Yes." "So he wasn't buying your building to get to you. He already had your building and hadn't told you because he didn't know you were in it." "That's what he says." "And you believe him?" Adriana pressed her forehead against the steering wheel. "I don't know what I believe. I believe the memo. I can read a date." She paused. "I believe he was angry about the email. Not defensive angry. There's a difference. And the apology, he didn't over-explain it. He just said it." Julia was quiet for a moment. Then, "Adriana, I love you. You are the most practical woman I have ever known, and that is your greatest strength and also sometimes your greatest problem." "What does that mean?" "It means," Julia said carefully, "that you are currently sitting in your car outside a building in which a man just apologized to you without prompting, showed you documentation to prove he hadn't manipulated you, and then let you leave without trying to stop you. And you're calling that suspicious. I'm calling it complicated. Everything worth having is complicated. Julia, I'm not telling you to fall in love with the man. I'm telling you to stop treating every piece of evidence that he might be decent as a reason to run. A beat. Go do your presentation for Paolo. Handle your Friday deadline. And Adriana if he calls pickup." She hung up. Adriana sat in the car, breathed, started the engine, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but she recognized it, the same one that had sent her a message about the parking spot 2 nights ago. "Your studio lease is renewed, 5 years, same rate. Documents will reach you by end of day." She stared at the screen for a long time. 5 years, same rate, just like that, signed off on like a line item, like it was nothing, like it hadn't just handed her the stability she'd spent 4 years unable to secure. She could feel the relief trying to rise in her chest, and she pressed it down hard, because relief was the most dangerous thing she could feel right now. She typed back, "That's not something I asked for." The reply came in under a minute. "No, it's something you needed, different thing." She put the phone in her bag, gripped the steering wheel, said out loud to no one, to herself, to the particular frequency of the morning, "You are going to be so much trouble." She didn't mean it as a complaint. That was the problem. She drove back to her studio, went upstairs, opened her laptop, and pulled up the Paolo Santoro project. She worked for 6 hours straight, clean focused, the kind of productive that happens when your emotions are running so hot that your brain roots everything else into work to avoid a meltdown. By 4 o'clock, she had a concept deck she was genuinely proud of. By 4:30, she had an email from Paolo saying he'd looked at her preliminary notes and wanted to meet that week to discuss expanding the scope of the project. She sent a professional reply. Then she sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. The scope of the project expanding meant more money. Real money, the kind that changed the number in her bank account from something she tracked anxiously to something she simply had. She had been here before, the almost of it, the edge of the thing, and watched it fall through. A client backing out, a contract misread, a handshake that turned out to mean nothing. She did not let herself get excited. She was very disciplined about not getting excited. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen, an unknown number, not Carlos. She almost didn't answer. She answered. "Ms. Romano?" A woman's voice. Professional clip, the voice of someone accustomed to delivering information efficiently. "My name is Elena Caruso. I'm calling on behalf of the Ferretti Group's Cultural Development Division. We've been looking at our upcoming renovation project for the Palazzo Meridionale, the historic property on the waterfront. We need a lead designer for the interior concept work. Mr. Ferretti suggested your name." Adriana said nothing. "Ms. Romano." "I'm here," she said. "Sorry. What's the scope of the project?" Elena told her. It took 3 minutes. By the end of the 3 minutes, Adriana's hand was gripping the phone hard enough that her knuckles had gone white because the scope of the project was the largest single commission she had ever been within any distance of. It was the kind of project that didn't come to freelancers. It came to established firms with 15 people in a portfolio that read like a who's who of Italian architecture. He suggested me specifically, Adriana said. He was quite specific, yes. Can I ask why? A brief pause. He said, and I'm quoting, that you were the only designer he'd seen in 10 years who understood that being certain and being right are not the same thing. The gallery, via Toledo, 6 months ago, he had remembered her exact words, and he had used them, given them back to her through this phone call, like a key that fit a lock she hadn't known she had. I'll need to review the project brief before I agree to anything, Adriana said. Her voice was steady, professional, entirely controlled. Of course, I'll send it over this afternoon. She hung up, set the phone down on her desk, put both hands flat on the desk surface and stared at them. He had done it again. Not the least that had been straightforward, a document, a number. This was something else. This was him handing her not a safety net, but a ladder. This was him saying, I'm not keeping you, I'm launching you. And the difference between those two things was everything. She sat with that for a long time. Then she picked up her phone, typed one message to Carlo Ferretti's number, the Palazzo Project. His reply came in 40 seconds. Yes, she typed why. His reply, because it will be extraordinary, and so will the work. She looked at that for a moment, then typed, if I take this, it's because I'm qualified, not because of dinner. 40 seconds again. Then I know, that's why I recommended you. Adriana put down the phone, stood up, walked to the window of her studio with its 5-year lease at the same rate, documents arriving by end of day. Looked out at the street below, the narrow cobblestones. The cafe with the 2 men who had watched her argue with a man in an SUV yesterday morning like it was the most interesting thing they'd seen in weeks. 48 hours ago, she had circled this block looking for a parking space. She had 47 euros and 3 client emails, and a presentation she was half ready for, and a life that was almost enough, but not quite. And now she had a 5-year lease, a project brief incoming from one of the most significant development groups in southern Italy, and a man she couldn't figure out who seemed, despite every instinct telling her to be careful, to be genuinely, inconveniently interested in her elevation rather than her dependence. She didn't know whether to be grateful or terrified. She realized both. Completely both in equal measure, which was perhaps the most honest thing she'd felt in years. Her phone buzzed one more time. She looked at the screen. Not Carlo. The unknown number from this morning. The one that had sent the email about the lease, the margin note, the warning, a new message, 4 words only, no signature. This isn't over, Romano. She stared at it. The warmth she'd been holding carefully in her chest went cold and still. Someone had been watching her this morning. Someone knew she'd gone to his office, knew she'd come back, knew enough to know that whatever they'd tried to start this morning had not worked. And rather than going quiet, they were telling her plainly, we're still here. She didn't call Carlo, not immediately. She sat down, screenshotted the message, opened a new document, and started writing down everything she knew, every name, every date, every event in the last 48 hours in the clean, logical order of a woman who had learned long ago that the only power she had ever been able to rely on was her own mind. Then she picked up her phone and called him. He answered on the second ring. I got the same message, he said before she could speak. Different wording, same sender. They're not backing off, no. Who are they? A pause. Not evasive, careful. I have a meeting tonight with someone who will give me a name. Will you tell me what you find out? A beat. Then yes, she exhaled slowly. Carlo, yes. I'm going to take the Palazzo project, she said. And I need you to understand that when I do, it's because it's the right project for my work, not because of anything else. I know, he said. And if this situation, whoever these people are, whatever they want, touches my work, my clients, my name, it won't. If it does, Adriana. His voice was quiet, certain. It won't. She held the phone for a moment. Outside, the city went on being the city, loud and ancient and entirely indifferent to the specific shape of her particular problem. She had 47 euros 2 days ago. She had a stranger who knew her exact words from 6 months ago and used them as a recommendation. She had an anonymous thread on her phone and a 5-year lease she hadn't asked for, and a feeling in her chest that was somewhere between a warning and a beginning, and she still could not tell which. "Okay," she said. "Call me when you have the name." She hung up, looked back at the window, at the street, at the parking spot, her parking spot empty, now quiet in the late afternoon light. "This isn't over, Romano." "No," she thought, "it's not, but neither am I." He called at 11:43 that night. Adriana was still awake. She had given up pretending, otherwise around 10 made tea she didn't drink, and sat at her desk with the Palazzo project brief open on her laptop, reading the same paragraph about load-bearing walls and heritage preservation requirements for the fourth time without absorbing a word of it. When her phone lit up with his number, she answered before the second ring, which she noted and chose not to examine. "I have the name," Carlos said. "Tell me." "Marco Batale." A pause that had weight to it. "He was my operations director for 3 years. I let him go 8 months ago." "Why?" "Because he was moving money in ways that didn't belong to him." Carlo's voice was even, but she had learned in 3 days that evenness in him wasn't the absence of feeling, it was feeling under very high pressure contained. He built relationships with a property group I was in the process of acquiring. He had plans for that portfolio. My acquisition ended those plans. "And your acquisition included my building," Adriana said. "Yes." "So when he sent me that email, he wanted to create a problem between us before we became difficult to separate. A beat. He miscalculated." She absorbed this. "How dangerous is he?" The pause before his answer was 3 seconds longer than she liked. "Ambitious," Carlos said finally. "Cornered," which is his own category. "That's not a no." "No," he said, "it's not." She looked at the paragraph about load-bearing walls. It still made no sense. "What are you going to do, Bosco?" "Handle it." "Carlo." She said his name the way she'd learned made him stop and recalibrate, direct, undecorated, no room for the managed version. "What does that mean?" Another pause. "It means he won't contact you again." "That's not what I asked." "I know." His voice shifted, something beneath the composure, something she was only just learning to hear. "Adriana, there are parts of how I operate that aren't clean. I've never pretended otherwise. But I need you to trust that this particular situation will be resolved without anything that touches you." "I'm already touched by it," she said. "I woke up to that email." "I know, I'm sorry." The apology came the same way as in his office, no wrapping, no softening. Just the words, "I'm asking you to let me finish this." She thought about it for longer than was comfortable for either of them. "Okay," she said, "but if anything changes, anything that I need to know, you tell me. Immediately." "Yes." "Good night, Carlo." "Good night." Then just before she could hang up, the brief, page 11. "The Eastern Wing Atrium, that's where the work is." She blinked. "You read the brief?" "I wrote the brief." She opened to page 11. "The Eastern Wing Atrium, a vaulted space original. 1890s plasterwork ignored by every previous renovation team because it was structurally complicated and visually overwhelming." She looked at it for 30 seconds and felt her brain shift into a gear she recognized, the one that meant she was going to think about nothing else until she solved it. "You did that on purpose?" she said. "Sleep well, Adriana." He hung up. She worked until 2 in the morning on the Eastern Wing. The next 3 days moved at a velocity she hadn't experienced in years. The Paolo Santoro meeting on Friday went 40 minutes over schedule because Paolo, who had initially hired her to redesign a hotel lobby, kept expanding his vision the more she presented. Could she do the restaurant concept too? What about the rooftop? Had she ever worked with a lighting designer because he knew someone, and she left with a contract that was 4 times the original scope and hands that wouldn't stop shaking until she got to the stairwell and pressed them flat against the cool wall. She called Julia from the stairwell. 4 times, Julia said. 4 times the original number. "Adriana Romano." "I know. I'm going to cry." "Please don't. I'm already barely holding it together." "You're allowed to be happy," Julia said. "You're allowed to let something good happen." "Something good happened," Adriana said. "I'm processing it." "That's not processing. That's auditing." "Stop auditing and be happy for 30 seconds. She was quiet. Then she said very quietly, so the stairwell was the only witness, "I'm happy." "There you go," Julia said softly. She drove back to her studio. There was a message from Carlo's number, just 3 words. "How did it go?" She typed back, 4 times the original scope. His reply came in 20 seconds. Of course it did. She looked at that for a long moment. 2 words that managed to be both arrogant and entirely sincere. She put the phone in her bag and went upstairs to work. She did not hear from Marco Vitali again. Whatever Carlo had done, and she made a deliberate choice not to ask for specifics. The anonymous messages stopped. The pressure she'd felt since waking up to that email 3 days ago, the sense of being watched from somewhere she couldn't identify, went quiet. She noticed its absence the way you notice silence after a noise you've forgotten you'd been hearing. What she did hear from with increasing frequency was Carlo. Not in the dramatic way she might have expected. No more parking spot negotiations, no midnight revelations, no documents slid across desks. Instead, it was smaller things. A message at 7 in the morning. There's a structural engineer presenting at the Meridional site at 10 if you want to hear it. A question sent mid-afternoon. The plasterwork in the atrium, have you decided on restoration or reproduction? A recommendation forwarded without comment for a supplier who specialized in period-appropriate materials. He was pulling her into the project the way a tide pulls gradually steadily, until she looked up one morning and realized she was in deep water and couldn't remember wading in. She went to the Meridionale site for the first time on a Thursday, 10 days after the parking spot. She walked through the building with a structural engineer named Roberto, who spoke in long technical sentences she followed precisely, and a project coordinator named Lucia, who kept shooting glances at Adriana with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. Somewhere on the second floor, in the middle of a conversation about original floor joists, she heard footsteps behind her and turned around. Carlo. He was in a different kind of suit than the one he'd worn in the SUV, slightly less formal, like a man who had been in this building already that morning doing something practical. He had a rolled set of drawings in his hand and a look on his face that was the first unguarded expression she'd ever seen arrive before he could arrange it, something quick and genuine there, and gone before he adjusted to his normal composure. You're here, he said. You told me about Roberto's presentation, she said. I didn't expect you this fast. The Eastern Wing kept me up for 4 nights. I needed to see it in person. She paused. Did you not want me here today? I very much want you here today, he said. I just didn't expect it to feel like that. Like what? He looked at her for a moment. Like something going right, he said. She didn't know what to do with that, so she turned back to Roberto and asked him 3 questions about the load-bearing structure of the eastern wall. Carlo fell into step beside her for the rest of the walkthrough, and it was the most comfortable she'd been in his presence since that first dinner, because they were talking about the building. And the building was neutral ground where she was entirely confident, and he was clearly in his own element, and they moved through the spaces like 2 people who had been working together for years rather than knowing each other for 10 days. On the 3rd floor in the atrium, she stopped. She'd known from the brief what it would be. She hadn't known what it would do to her, the scale of it, the quality of the light that fell through the dust-film skylights, the original plasterwork running along the upper cornice, like something that had been holding its breath for 100 years, waiting for someone to notice it was still alive. She was quiet for a long time. Carlo stood beside her and didn't say anything. He just waited, let her look, let her think. She was beginning to understand this was intentional, that his silences were a form of generosity, space deliberately made for someone else to occupy. I know what to do with it, she said finally. I thought you might. She turned to look at him. He was watching her with that expression again, the one that wasn't calculation or performance. Just attention. Real focused, unwavering attention, the kind that felt like being seen rather than studied. Don't look at me like that, she said. Like what? Like I'm part of the project. No, you are part of the project. Carlo. Adriana. He said her name with the same direct weight she used on his. She noticed this, filed it. You know that's not what I mean. She looked back at the atrium. Yes, she said quietly. I know. That evening, she had dinner with Julia, real dinner at Julia's kitchen table with bad wine and good bread, and the specific comfort of a friendship that had survived 12 years and knew all her tells. She told Julia about the atrium, about the way he'd looked at her, about the silence he'd made space for. Julia listened with her chin in her hand, and when Adriana finished, she said, You're falling for him. I'm not. You described the way he looked at you for 4 sentences, Julia said. You described the atrium for 2. Adriana opened her mouth, closed it. You're allowed, Julia said. I keep telling you, you're allowed. She stopped, searched for the right word. He's not simple, Julia. Nothing about him is simple. There are parts of his life I don't have access to and probably shouldn't. There are people who are afraid of him. There are things he handles that he doesn't explain. He protected you from Vitale. Yes. He gave you the project. Because I'm qualified. And he gave you the 5-year lease. Which I didn't ask for. Which you needed, Julia said. Which is what he said. There's a difference, Vaughan. She reached across the table and covered Adriana's hand with hers. The man has been watching you for 6 months. He remembered your exact words from a crowded gallery. He got rid of the person threatening you in 48 hours. And when you walked into his office furious and ready to fight, he showed you documentation and apologized. She paused. I'm not saying trust him completely. I'm saying stop treating him like a threat when the evidence keeps pointing elsewhere. Adriana looked at her wine glass. What if I'm wrong? What if I let myself feel this and it turns out to be? Then it turns out, Julia said simply, and you've survived worse. She drove home, sat in her car outside her building for a moment before going up. Her phone buzzed. Carlo, the Heritage Committee approved the atrium concept. Whatever you're planning, you have full authorization. She stared at the message. She hadn't submitted a concept yet. She hadn't written down what she was planning. She had stood in the atrium for 8 minutes and thought, and whatever she'd been thinking had apparently been visible on her face because he had gone back and gotten approval for something she hadn't formally proposed. She typed, "How did you get approval for something I haven't submitted yet?" His reply, I told them the designer had stood in the atrium for 8 minutes without saying a word and then said she knew exactly what to do with it. They approved it on that basis. She laughed, startled, the same laugh she'd had in the cab the first night. She put the phone in her bag, went upstairs and sat down at her desk, opened a new document, and began to write down for the first time in real words, in a structure she could hand to another human being, exactly what she was going to do with the eastern wing atrium of the Palazzo Meridionale. She worked until 4 a.m. When she finally stopped, what was on the page was the best thing she had produced in 4 years. She knew it the way you sometimes know things without doubt, without the usual anxious second-guessing. It was right. It was hers. And somehow the fact that he had gotten a room of committee members to approve it on the basis of her 8 minutes of silence made it feel impossibly even more hers. She sent him the document at 4:12 a.m. with no message attached. His reply came at 4:18. 6 words, I knew it. Go to sleep. She smiled at the screen for a moment. Then she closed the laptop and did exactly that. The first time he touched her was 12 days after the parking spot. Not dramatically, nothing about it was a scene. They were at the Meridionale again, standing in the second-floor corridor, reviewing a question about tile sourcing, and she was pointing at something on the printed plan, and he leaned in to look, and their hands were both on the paper, and his fingers moved briefly lightly across the back of her hand. It lasted 2 seconds. He didn't comment on it. She didn't pull away. But she felt it for the rest of the afternoon. That night, he asked her via text if she'd eaten. She said she'd had half a sandwich at 1 o'clock. He said that was not eating. She said she'd been busy. He said, I'm outside. She looked at her phone. Then she looked at her front door. Then she grabbed her jacket and went downstairs. He was parked down the block, not the imposing SUV, but a smaller car. Something that looked almost ordinary, which from him felt like its own kind of statement. She got in. He drove to a place she'd never been, a small restaurant on a narrow street that she suspected most people in Naples didn't know existed, where the owner greeted Carlo by his first name and brought them food without a menu and asked no questions. They sat across from each other. She ate, he ate. They talked about the project, about the Heritage Committee, about a supplier in Rome who was giving Roberto trouble. Real conversation. Work conversation. The kind that assumed continuity, that assumed tomorrow and the day after that, assumed she would still be in this project, in this building, in this particular orbit for the foreseeable future. At some point, she realized that the conversation had shifted. She couldn't identify exactly when from the project to something else. She was talking about her first year freelancing, the specific terror of it, the way she used to lie awake doing the math she could never quite make work. He was listening, not waiting, listening. The worst part, she said, Wasn't the money, it was the doubt. The constant question of whether I was choosing the hard thing because it was right or because I was too stubborn to admit it wasn't working. How did you know the difference? He asked. She thought about it. When I finished out something and it was good, she said, really good. The doubt went quiet, not gone quiet, and quiet was enough. He was looking at her. That look again, the unguarded one. I know that, he said. You don't seem like someone who doubts much. Everyone doubts, he said. I've just spent a long time making sure no one can tell. She looked at him. The restaurant was quiet around them, the owner moving somewhere in the back, the sound of the street muffled and distant. Why tell me, she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Because you'd know anyway, he said. You're very hard to perform for. Is that a compliment? It's a fact, he said. And yes, she looked down at the table, then back up. Carlo, what are we doing? He didn't pretend not to understand. I think, he said carefully, we're doing something that neither of us entirely planned and both of us are choosing anyway. That's terrifying, she said. Yes, he agreed. I'm a freelancer who had 47 euros 2 weeks ago. You currently have a 5-year lease, a hotel contract, 4 times its original scope in the Palazzo Meridionale project, he said. The 47 euros is a historical data point. I'm not talking about the money. I know. He set down his glass, leaned forward slightly. Adriana, I'm not asking you to trust me entirely. I'm asking you to trust this conversation, right now, this table. What's actually happening between two people who, against what I assume were both of our better judgments, keep ending up here? She looked at him for a long time. The practical part of her mind ran its usual inventory, the risks, the complications, the parts of his life she couldn't see the fact that she was embedded in his professional world now in ways that made any personal boundary inherently complicated. She ran through all of it, itemized it, filed it, and then she made a decision. Not with the practical part of her mind, with the other part, the part that had stood in the atrium and looked up at the plasterwork and felt something crack open in her chest that she hadn't felt since she couldn't remember when. Okay, she said. Okay, he repeated. They drove back to her building in the kind of quiet that was comfortable, not empty, not performed. She got out of the car. He walked her to the door, which she also hadn't expected, and which also disarmed her. At the door she turned. They were close enough that the distance felt intentional, maintained, acknowledged. Thank you for dinner, she said. You said that the first night, he said, almost word for word. I mean it both times. He looked at her for a moment. Then he reached up slowly, no pretense, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. One gesture. Simple. His hand stayed there for a moment, just at the edge of her jaw. Good night, Adriana, he said. Good night, she said. He stepped back. She went inside, leaned against the inside of the door and stayed very still for a full minute. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Not Carlo. An email from an address she didn't recognize, a string of numbers untraceable looking. The subject line was one sentence. You think Vitale was the problem. He wasn't. Ask Ferretti about Palazzo Nord. Her blood went cold. Palazzo Nord. She had heard that name. Not recently, years ago at the edge of a conversation at an industry event. Someone's name said in a low voice, the phrase that whole Palazzo Nord situation used with the tight, careful tone people used for things that had gone wrong in ways no one wanted to document. She had never connected it to anyone specific. She looked at the email for a long time. Then she opened a newsfeed and typed 2 words into her search engine. Palazzo Nord. The results loaded. She read the first 3. Then she sat back in her chair and stared at the screen and felt the warmth of the last 3 hours drain out of her like water from a cracked glass. Because Palazzo Nord was a building, a heritage building in Salerno, acquired by a development group 6 years ago, renovated, and then 18 months into the project abandoned. The design team had walked off. The Heritage Committee had filed complaints. There had been legal proceedings sealed. The building stood half-finished to this day, its original 19th century interiors gutted beyond repair, its plasterwork gone, its history erased. The acquiring company was listed in one of the articles as a subsidiary. The subsidiary had a parent company. The parent company was Ferretti Holdings. Adriana sat with that for a very long time. Her hands were flat on the desk. The screen glowed. Somewhere outside Naples was being loud and ancient and entirely indifferent. She thought about the atrium. The 8 minutes of silence. I knew it. Go to sleep. She thought about the email. You think Vitale was the problem? She thought about what he'd said tonight. There are parts of how I operate that aren't clean, and how she had chosen deliberately not to push on that. Maybe she should have pushed. She did not call him. Not tonight. She closed the search tab, opened the Palazzo Meridionale concept document, read what she'd written at 4 in the morning and the best work she'd produced in 4 years. She thought, I need to know what happened in Salerno. And then underneath that quieter and more complicated, I hope the answer doesn't change everything. But she already knew the way you sometimes know things without doubt, without the anxious second guessing that it might. She didn't sleep again. Not even close. She sat at her desk until the sky outside went from black to the deep bruised blue that comes just before dawn, reading everything she could find about Palazzo Nord. There wasn't much. The legal proceedings had been sealed tight, the coverage thin, the kind of thin that suggested someone had made sure it stayed that way. But the outline was clear enough. Heritage building acquired. Renovation begun. Design team departed under circumstances described in one article as irreconcilable differences over scope, and in another more carefully as a dispute regarding the integrity of the original structure. 18 months of work, then nothing. The building standing gutted in Salerno like a wound that hadn't closed. Ferretti Holdings, parent company, listed plainly in a 2019 property record she found in a municipal archive. She made a list of what she knew, then a list of what she didn't. The second list was longer, and the items on it were heavier. At 6:45, she closed her laptop, stood up, and did something she had promised herself she would always do before acting on an emotion she waited. Not forever, just until she could tell the difference between what she knew and what she feared, because those were not the same thing, and she had learned expensively that treating them as equivalent was how people made decisions they spent years undoing. What she knew, Ferretti Holdings had owned the company that acquired Palazzo Nord. The building had been damaged. The details were sealed. What she feared, that the man who had gotten authorization for her atrium concept on the basis of 8 minutes of silence was the same kind of man who gutted a 19th century building and walked away. At 7:30, she texted him. Not a long message. 4 words, I need to talk. He called in 90 seconds. Not a text back, a call which told her he had read the 4 words and understood they were serious. What happened? He said. No greeting. Palazzo Nord, she said. Silence. 3 full seconds, the longest pause she had ever gotten from him. Where did you see that name? Another email, same type as the first one. When? Last night after you dropped me off. Another pause. Adriana, I need you to tell me what happened there, she said. Well, the managed version, not what you'd tell a journalist or a committee. What actually happened? She heard him exhale. I'll come to you. I'll come to you, she said immediately. I need to be somewhere I can leave. A beat. Okay, he said, 1 hour. She drove to his office building with both hands on the wheel and her mind running the same loop it had been running all night: the atrium, the email, the plasterwork Salerno. His hand at her jaw, the gutted building, and a municipal archive photograph. I knew it. Go to sleep. Round and round, each element casting the others in different light depending on which one she looked at first. His assistant met her at the elevator. Carlo was already standing when she came in. No jacket this time. He looked like a man who also hadn't slept, which she hadn't expected, and which complicated things. Sit down, he said. Tell me about Palazzo Nord first, she said. Then I'll decide if I'm sitting. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded. 6 years ago, Ferretti Holdings acquired a distressed property group in Salerno. Palazzo Nord was part of that portfolio. The acquisition was legitimate. The group was bankrupt. The building was deteriorating. We had a restoration plan approved by the Heritage Committee. He paused. I assigned head Marco Vitale to manage the project. She went still. He brought in his own team, Carlo continued, his own contractors, his own design lead. I was managing 4 other acquisitions at the time. I trusted him with the operational details. His jaw tightened. She could see it, the physical cost of the next words. He didn't restore it, he stripped it. Faster, cheaper, more profitable on the resale. By the time I understood what was happening, 8 months of the original structure was gone. What did you do? She asked. I shut it down. Immediately. Terminated Vitaly's authority, brought in a conservation team, halted all work. But the damage, he stopped. The damage was done. The plaster work on the upper 2 floors, the original tile work, the ceiling panels in the east corridor. He looked at her directly. I couldn't put it back. What was gone was gone. Adriana stood very still. The legal proceedings. I settled with the Heritage Committee, fully, funded a restoration research program at the University of Salerno for 10 years. The terms were sealed at their request. They didn't want the publicity. Neither did I, but for different reasons. What reasons? Because I should have caught it earlier, he said, and I didn't. And no amount of settlement money changes what that building lost. He said it flatly, not performing contrition, stating a fact he had clearly stated to himself many times already. That's why I let Vitaly go 8 months ago. Not just the money, I'd known about the money for longer. It was when I found documentation that he'd been planning to do the same thing to 2 more buildings in the current portfolio. My buildings, she said, slowly, among others. And when you acquired the portfolio, I had the buildings individually assessed, he said. Every heritage element cataloged, every lease reviewed. The memo you saw, the one dated 11 days ago, that was me making sure Vitaly's plans for those buildings died with his employment. She looked at him. He was looking back at her without flinching, without managing his expression into something easier to receive, just holding her gaze and letting her see whatever she could see. Why didn't you tell me this when I came here the first time? She asked. When I confronted you about the email. Because you came in furious and I needed to address what was in front of me, he said. And because Palazzo Nord is, he paused, not something I lead with, not because I'm hiding it, because it's the thing I got wrong, the most wrong I have ever gotten anything in this work. And I am very bad at leading with failure. She exhaled. Carlo, I know, he said. That's not... She stopped, started again. That's not a small thing. No, he said, it's not. A building lost its history because you trusted the wrong person with it. Yes. And now you've given me a building, she said. The Meridionale, the atrium, full authorization. Yes. Because she stopped, because she could see it now, all of it laid out in a logic that was painful and clear. He hadn't given her the project as a gift or a gesture. He had given it to her because he had stood in that building and watched her stand in the atrium for 8 minutes and understood something about the way she looked at old things like they were still alive, like they were owed something. He had recognized it because it was the thing he had failed to protect in Salerno, and he was not a man who made the same mistake twice. Say it, he said quietly. You're trying to get it right, she said. He was quiet. Yes. You're not just funding a renovation. You're trying to, she searched for the word, make it mean something. Fix something you can't actually fix. Yes, he said, and no. He moved just slightly, closed a few feet of the distance between them. I want it to be extraordinary. Not for Salerno, not as penance, because it deserves to be extraordinary. He looked at her steadily. And so do you. The room was very quiet. You should have told me, she said, about Palazzo Nord before I found out from an anonymous email at midnight. I know. It's not acceptable to let me walk into something without the information I need. I know that too, he said. I'm telling you now. Because I found it. Because you found it, he admitted. And because you asked. And because, he paused, I find that I don't want to have things between us that you don't know. She looked at him. That sentence, the shape of it, the quiet weight of it landed somewhere deep and stayed there. I'm angry, she said. I know. I'm still angry. I know. And I'm still going to do the atrium, she said, because the building deserves it, and because my work is my work, and it has nothing to do with being angry at you. Something moved across his face, relief, she thought, though on him it was barely visible. Okay. But we're going to Salerno, she said. You and me, I want to see it. He blinked. Palazzo Nord. I want to see what was lost, she said, not from a photograph, in person. She held his gaze. If you want me to understand what this project means to you, really understand it, I need to see Salerno. A long pause. She could see him weighing at the exposure of it, the specific vulnerability of standing in a place where he had failed with someone who was just now deciding whether to trust him. When he said, Saturday. I'll drive, he said. She nodded, picked up her bag. At the door she stopped, not because he'd said anything, but because something else had occurred to her. Something cold. The person who sent me the Palazzo Nord email, she said. If it wasn't Vitale, he said. Not his style. Too subtle. Then who? He was quiet for a moment that felt careful rather than evasive. I have a suspicion, he said. I'm not ready to say it yet. Carlo. When I'm sure, he said, I will tell you immediately, I promise. She studied him. That better not be the managed version. It's not, he said. I don't know yet. When I know, you'll know. She left. In the elevator, she pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes for exactly the 11 floors down. Not shaking this time. Something else, something quieter and more complicated than adrenaline. She was angry at him. She also believed him. She also understood in the particular way that only completely inconvenient realizations arrive, that those two things were not mutually exclusive, and that she was going to have to learn to hold both of them without dropping either. She went back to her studio, called Julia. Palazzo Nord, Julia said when she finished. A statement, not a question. And Vitale was his operations director. Yes. So the man who damaged one heritage building is the same man who tried to use you to get back at the man who fired him for planning to damage more heritage buildings. That's the shape of it. Julia was quiet for a moment. And Carlo? He settled, funded a research program, fired Vitale 8 months ago when he found he was planning to do it again. And told you all of this. When I asked directly, yes. Adriana, Julia said, I'm not going to tell you what to think. You know how I feel. But I will say this, a man who is only performing decency does not take you to Salerno to see his failure in person. Adriana looked at her desk, at the Palazzo Meridionale concept document still open on her screen, at the line she'd written at 4 a.m, the atrium should feel like something recovered, not reconstructed. The difference is honesty. She had written that, about a building, and it applied precisely and uncomfortably to everything happening around it. Saturday came the way significant days often do, ordinary on the surface, unremarkable in its weather and traffic, and the small administrative details of getting from one place to another. Carlo picked her up at 8. They drove south towards Salerno largely in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than the managed quiet she'd first learned from him. Looser, more inhabited, the kind of silence two people share when they no longer need to fill space to prove something. Halfway there, he said, I haven't been back since the settlement. She looked at him. Why are you going now? Because you asked me to, he said, and because I think he stopped, which was unusual for him. I think I've been avoiding it. Powerful men often avoid their mistakes, she said, not cruelly, just plainly. Yes, he said, we do. Palazzo Nord was on a side street in the old part of Salerno, behind a construction hoarding that had weathered 2 years of rain and was coming apart at the corners. Carlo had a key to the padlock on the access door. He opened it. They went in. She had seen the photographs. She was not prepared for the reality. She stood in what had been the grand entry hall and looked up at the ceiling. Bare concrete where the original panels had been, the ghostly outlines of removed plasterwork visible on the walls like bruises. The proportions of the space still beautiful and heartbreaking because of it, because you could see exactly what had been there and what was now irretrievably absent. She didn't say anything for a long time. Carlo stood beside her, said nothing. She could feel without looking at him what it cost him to be in this room. The East Corridor, she said finally. He let her. The corridor was worse. The tile work she'd read about, described in the Heritage Committee report as irreplaceable handmade ceramic panels circa 1887, was gone, entirely replaced with a standard commercial tile that was not even convincingly sympathetic. Someone had done that. Had made that choice, had ordered that installation, had looked at 1,887 ceramic panels and calculated their removal in euros per square meter. Who ordered the specific removals, she said. Vitale's contractor, Carlo said, on his instructions. And you really didn't know? I really didn't know. His voice was level, but she heard what was underneath it, not defense, but the specific exhaustion of a man who has had that question living inside him for years. I have asked myself every version of that question for 6 years. What I missed, what I should have seen. Whether I chose not to look because the returns on the acquisition were good and looking might have complicated them. He paused. The honest answer is that I don't know, and I don't know is worse than yes. She turned to look at him then. He was looking at the blank concrete ceiling of the corridor with an expression she had never seen on him before, open, unguarded, unmanaged. The face of a man standing in the evidence of his own failure without anything to put between himself and it. What would you do differently? She asked. I would have been here, he said simply, in person, at every stage. No delegation on the structural decisions, no trusting the numbers without seeing what the numbers represented. He looked at her. The same way I've been at the Meridian Alley. Since me, she said. You've been at the Meridian Alley since me. He held her gaze. Yes. She looked back at the corridor, the ghost marks on the walls, the commercial tile. The panels, she said. Do you know where they went? Most of them were sold through a private dealer to a buyer in Milan. I've been in contact with the family. He paused, not interested in returning them. Have you made a formal offer? 3 times. What number did you offer last? He told her. She raised both eyebrows. And they still said no. The panels are installed in their private residence, he said. They've become part of the house. The owner considers them, his jaw tightened, an investment. She looked at him. I want the name of the family. Adriana. I'm not going to do anything inadvisable, she said. I want the name because I know someone who specializes in private cultural repatriation negotiations, and she has a success rate that would probably surprise you. And if there is any chance of getting those panels back, she stopped. This building can be finished, properly. Not as it was, it can never be as it was, but honestly, in a way that acknowledges what was lost rather than papering over it. She turned to face him fully. Give me the name. He looked at her for a long moment. Elena Caruso can get it to you by Monday. Good. They stood in the corridor in silence for a moment. Then he said quietly, and she almost missed it beneath the ambient sounds of the old building, Why are you doing this? Because it needs to be done, she said. That's not the only reason. She was quiet. No, she said. It's not. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to, and he didn't push, and that particular silence was the most intimate thing that had happened between them yet. They drove back to Naples in the late afternoon, the sun going gold and low, and the city assembling itself on the horizon the way it always did, urgent and ancient and overwhelming and home. She fell asleep somewhere on the highway, which she discovered when she woke up and found the car was stopped, and Carlo was sitting very still in the driver's seat, not moving so as not to wake her. How long? She said, disoriented. 40 minutes, he said. We're outside your building. She sat up, looked at him. He had sat in a parked car for 40 minutes so she could sleep. She absorbed this, did not comment on it, filed it in the place where she was keeping all the things about him that she was still deciding what to do with. Thank you, she said, for the drivery, for Salerno, she said, for showing me. He nodded. She got out. At the door she turned, and he had gotten out too, of course he had, and was standing by the car. Carlo, she said, the person you suspect, the one sending the emails. Your suspicion is it's someone I've met. He looked at her across the narrow street. The evening was warm. Somewhere above them, her studio, her desk, the Meridian Alley concept document. The 5-year lease, all of it assembled in the last 18 days from a parking spot and a woman who didn't move. Yes, he said, her stomach dropping. Who? He was quiet for a moment. Then Paolo Santoro. She stared. My client. Yes. The hotel rebrand, the contract I signed 2 weeks ago. Yes. Carlo. Her voice came out very carefully. Why would Paolo Santoro send me anonymous emails about you? Because Paolo Santoro was Marco Vitale's primary business partner for 6 years, he said. Before I fired Vitale, before the acquisition, Paolo knew what Vitale had planned for that portfolio. He invested in it. The cobblestones of the street seemed to tilt. He hired me to get close to you. He hired you the day after our first dinner, Carlo said, which he knew about because Vitale told him. They're still working together. Yes, she thought about the meeting. Paolo's expansions, the doubled and tripled scope, the way he'd kept asking her questions about Carlo, about the Meridionale, about the Ferretti Group's acquisition strategy. Questions she'd answered because they'd seemed like normal due diligence from a business client who wanted to understand his designer's other commitments. She had given Paolo Santoro a window directly into everything she knew. "What does he want?" she said. Her voice was very quiet. "The same thing Vitale always wanted," Carlo said. "The portfolio, the buildings, on terms I'd never agree to. And if he can't have the buildings," he paused, "he wants to make sure the Meridionale fails. If the flagship project falls apart, the entire acquisition looks troubled. Other investors pull back. He can move in at a lower price. And she stopped. "You were supposed to be the distraction," Carlo said. "You were supposed to be the thing that took my attention off the business. The complication, the emotional variable." She stood very still. "Instead," he said, "you became the most important part of the project." He said it simply without drama, which is why the emails escalated. She processed this for a long moment. The contract with Paolo, 4 times the original scope, signed and dated and professionally binding. "I have a contract with him." "Yes. I can't just—" "I know," Carlo said. "We need to be careful about how this is handled. If he knows we've identified him, he'll move differently. If he doesn't know, we can control what information he has," she said. Her mind was already moving and already sorting. The practical design thinking part of her brain that was very good at working with structure and constraint. "What do you need from me?" He looked at her for a moment. "Adriana, you don't have to be in this." "I'm already in it," she said. "You said that yourself. I'm the variable. So let me be a useful one." She held his gaze. "What do you need?" The way he looked at her, right then it was the Meridionale atrium feeling again. Something cracking open, something that had been waiting. "I need you to keep the Paolo relationship normal. Meet with him as scheduled. Don't give him anything new, but don't change your behavior enough to signal that something's shifted. And you—" "I'm going to give him a reason to move," Carlo said. "Something that looks like an opening, something he'll act on." "A trap," she said. "An invitation," he said, "for him to show us exactly what he's planning." She looked at him for a long moment. The evening had gone purple around them, Naples doing its most beautiful and indifferent thing. 18 days ago, she was circling this block looking for a parking spot. Now she was standing outside her building, being asked to participate in something that was entirely outside the life she had carefully, stubbornly, expensively built for herself. She thought about the Salerno corridor, the ghost marks on the walls. "I would have been here, in person, at every stage." "Okay," she said. His expression shifted. Something that she was almost certain relief. "Okay. One condition," she said. "Name it." "And after this is over," she said, "I want 3 days where no one sends me anonymous emails and no one tries to use me for anything, and the most complicated thing in my life is the Eastern Wing atrium." For the first time in hours, he smiled. Real. Human. The one that made him look 10 years younger. "Done," he said. She went inside. Upstairs, she sat at her desk, opened her laptop, looked at the Meridionale document, then opened a new one. She wrote a single line at the top, "Paolo Santoro, what he knows. What he thinks he knows and what I can control." She started filling it in. She was 3 pages deep when her phone buzzed. Not Carlo, not an unknown number. A contact, she recognized the private number of Elena Caruso, Carlo's project coordinator. She answered. "Ms. Romano." Elena's voice was careful. "I'm sorry to call this late. I need to tell you something. Mr. Ferretti doesn't know I'm calling." Adriana sat up straight. "Tell me." "The Palazzo Nord panels," Elena said. "The family in Milan. I've been in contact with them for 2 years on his behalf." A pause. "They've agreed to sell. They agreed 2 weeks ago. The papers are ready." Adriana frowned. "Then why didn't he tell me that today in Salerno?" "Because the condition of the sale," Elena said carefully, "is that the panels go back to Palazzo Nord, not the Meridionale, not another building, Palazzo Nord." Another pause. which means someone has to finish that building. Someone has to take the project. And he hasn't told anyone, Adriana said slowly, because he doesn't know who to trust. He's known about this condition for 2 weeks, Elena said. He's been trying to decide what to do with it. 2 weeks. The same 2 weeks as the acquisition review, the memo, the parking spot, the dinner, all of it. He had been carrying this for 2 weeks. A building he couldn't fix and a solution he couldn't use without trusting someone enough to hand it to them. Elena, Adriana said, why are you telling me this? A pause, because I've worked for Carlo Ferretti for 7 years, Elena said quietly, and I have never seen him bring someone to Salerno. Not once. She hung up. Adriana sat in the silence of her studio, the city outside, the document on her screen, the 2 weeks of events that had assembled themselves around a parking spot into something she didn't have a clean name for yet. She picked up her phone, typed one message to Carlo, 3 words, Palazzo Nord, both of them. She set the phone down, waited. His reply took 4 minutes, longer than any other reply he'd ever sent her. When it came, it was 1 word, yes. She looked at that word for a long time. Then she closed the Paolo Santoro document, opened the Meridionale file, and started a new page at the end. At the top, she wrote Palazzo Nord Recovery Concept Phase 1, and she began. She worked on the Palazzo Nord recovery concept until 3 in the morning, and when she finally stopped, she had 14 pages that felt like the truest work she had ever done. Not because they were technically perfect. They weren't yet. They were raw and directional and full of questions she'd need Roberto and a conservation specialist to answer, but because every decision on every page came from the same place. The corridor in Salerno, the ghost marks on the walls, the specific grief of a space that knew what it had lost. She saved the document, closed the laptop, sat in the dark for a moment. Then she opened it again and sent the 14 pages to Carlo with 1 line not finished, but enough to start. She was asleep before she could check if he'd read it. He called at 7:15. She answered on the first ring, which told her she had been sleeping lightly, waiting without admitting it. I read it, he said, and a pause that lasted long enough to make her chest tighten. It's extraordinary, he said. The word came out quiet and undecorated and entirely without his usual composure, and it was the most affecting thing he had said to her in 3 weeks of increasingly affecting things. It's a draft, she said. It's the answer, he said, to everything I didn't know how to solve. Another pause. Adriana, the panels come back to Palazzo Nord. Both projects run simultaneously. You lead both. She sat up. Carlo, that's an enormous scope. That's 2 major heritage renovations at the same time. I'm 1 person. You'll need a team, he said. I'll fund whatever you need, whoever you need. My own team, she said immediately. My selections, my hires. Your selections, he agreed, every one. She pressed her hand flat on her knee, the way she did when she was trying to keep herself from feeling something too fast. Why both, she said. Why not finish the Meridionale first and then? Because the panels are ready now, he said. And because I've waited 6 years to fix Palazzo Nord, and I don't want to wait 6 more. His voice dropped slightly. And because you're the only person I trust with it. She closed her eyes for a moment. That's a lot of trust for someone you met over a parking spot. It's exactly the right amount, and he said, for someone who stood in that corridor in Salerno and asked me what I would do differently. She exhaled. I need a week to look at this properly, to cost it out, cup it, figure out what the team needs to look like. Take the week. And I need to handle Paolo, she said, before anything else gets bigger. I'm not building 2 projects with that situation unresolved. His voice shifted steadier, harder in a way she recognized now as him moving into operational mode. I'm ready to move on Paolo when you are. I've been waiting for you to say the word. Tell me the plan, she said. He told her. It took 12 minutes. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. That's clean, she said. You sound surprised. I expected something more. She paused, dramatic. Dramatic creates problems, he said. Clean creates outcomes. The plan was in fact clean. Carlo would offer Paolo what appeared to be a minor consulting role on a separate Ferretti Group project. Nothing to do with the Meridionale. Nothing that looked significant. The offer would include access to certain portfolio documents as part of the due diligence process. Documents that would be real accurate and strategically selected to show Paolo exactly what he wanted to see, an apparent vulnerability in the Meridionale acquisition structure, a seam he could push. If Paolo was working with Vitale to destabilize the project, he would push. And when he did, he would push into a position that Carlo's legal team had already prepared for, a documented time-stamped record of interference in an active heritage project, generable under 3 separate provisions, that Elena Caruso's counterpart in legal had apparently been quietly building for 2 months. "You've been building this for 2 months, Adriana said. "I suspected Vitale hadn't gone quiet on his own," Carlo said. "I didn't know about Paolo until recently, but the legal framework was already there. So I was," she stopped. "When you gave me the Meridionale project, when you gave me the lease, you already knew there might be someone using me." "I knew there might be someone watching," he said carefully. "I didn't know it was someone you were already working with. But you gave me the project anyway." "I gave you the project because you're the right designer for it," he said. "The other situation, I wanted to protect you from it, not use you for it." A pause. "You're the one who chose to be in it. I want you to remember that." She did remember. She had said, "Let me be a useful variable." She had made that choice with clear eyes. "I remember," she said. "Good," he said, "because what I'm about to ask you requires a choice with equally clear eyes." She waited. "The meeting with Paolo on Thursday," he said. "I need you to go." "I know. And I need you to tell him something," he said. "Something specific, something that will look like you're confiding in a client, but is actually the seam I want him to find." She was quiet for a moment. "You want me to feed him information?" "Controlled information," he said. "Nothing false, nothing that could damage you professionally. One sentence about the Meridionale's financing structure that is technically true, publicly derivable, and will look to Paolo like you've given him something significant." "What's the sentence?" he told her. She turned it over in her mind. He was right. It was technically accurate, derivable from public records if you knew where to look, and completely harmless to the actual project. But to someone who thought they were extracting intelligence from a woman who didn't know she was being watched, it would look like a thread worth pulling. "And when he pulls it," she asked. "He'll contact Vitale," Carlo said. "Vitale will move money. And when he moves money, we have him. Both of them. And my contract with Paolo." "His firm is in violation of 2 clauses already," Carlo said. "Using a contracted designer to conduct competitor intelligence is grounds for immediate termination. You'll be clean. The contract dissolves on his breach, not yours." She exhaled slowly. "You had this ready." "I had options ready," he said. "I didn't know which one would be needed until recently." "Carlo," she said his name the way she always did when she needed him to hear the full weight of what was underneath it. "When this is over, when all of it is over, I need us to be in a place where there are no more options being held in reserve that I don't know about. No more frameworks being quietly built. No more situations being managed before I've been told there's a situation." The silence that followed was the longest and most honest silence she had ever gotten from him. "Yes," he said, "I can do that. Promise me." "I promise you," he said, not performed, not managed, the plain words. "Okay," she said, "I'll go to the meeting on Thursday." Thursday came. Paolo was warm as he always was, expansive, enthusiastic, the kind of man who made every room feel like he had been waiting specifically for your arrival. He ordered them both coffee and talked for 20 minutes about the hotel project, the rooftop concept, a lighting designer he wanted to bring in. Adriana listened, responded, was entirely herself, because the best performance of calm is no performance at all. At the 40-minute mark, in a pause that felt natural, she said the sentence Carlo had given her, casually, parenthetically, as if it were a minor detail she'd happened to mention. Paolo's expression didn't change, but his hand, which had been relaxed on the table, moved just slightly, just enough, to his phone. A small, involuntary reach. He stopped himself, smiled, changed the subject. She saw it, logged it, continued the conversation without a flicker. She texted Carlo from the car outside afterward. He took it. His reply was immediate. "I know. His phone contacted Vitale's number 4 minutes ago. We have it." She sat in the car and breathed. 4 minutes. Paolo had lasted 4 minutes after she left the table before he made the call. 4 minutes between his warm handshake at the door and his phone in his hand pulling at the thread she'd handed him. She had liked Paolo. She had genuinely professionally liked him. That was the particular bitterness of it. Not that she'd been fooled because she hadn't been fooled. She'd been used by someone skilled enough to be likable. That was different. But it stung in its own way. She texted Julia. "It's done, Julia." All of it, Adriana, the Paolo part. The rest is starting. Julia, come over tonight. I'll make the good pasta. She smiled at her phones, put it in her bag, started the car. The legal action against Paolo Santoro and Marco Vitale moved with a speed that told her Carlo had been genuinely ready for months. Within 72 hours of Paolo pulling the thread, the documented chain of communication between him and Vitale was in the hands of Carlo's legal team, the Heritage Committee, and in a move she hadn't expected, but which Carlo explained briefly as making sure the right people know first, the Cultural Affairs Division of the regional government. By the end of the week, Vitale's attempt to short sell shares in 3 Ferretti Group properties based on the false intelligence Paolo had provided him was on record. It would take months to work through the legal system, but the attempt was documented, time-stamped, and irrefutable. Paolo's contract with Adriana was formally dissolved on grounds of professional misconduct, with a letter from his own firm's legal department that arrived so quickly, she suspected they had been waiting for an excuse. She did not feel triumphant. She felt something quieter and more durable than triumph, the particular satisfaction of a problem correctly solved. Like a structural issue in a building finally addressed at the root rather than the surface. Clean, done, real. Carlo called the night the last document was filed. "It's over," he said. "The legal part," she said. "The rest takes longer." "Yes," he agreed. "It does." She was quiet for a moment. "You owe me 3 days," she said. "No anonymous emails, no managed situations. The most complicated thing in my life is the Eastern Wing atrium." She heard him exhale something that might have been a laugh briefly. "Starting when?" "Starting now," she said. He arrived at her building 20 minutes later, not with the SUV, the smaller car again, the almost ordinary one, but she was waiting on the steps with her jacket and her keys and no plan, which was unusual for her and felt in this particular moment entirely right. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Wherever you want," he said. She thought about it for approximately 4 seconds. "The coast," she said. "I need to see water." They drove south, the city fell away behind them, and the road curved along the coastline, and the lights of the water appeared, and Adriana rolled the window down and let the air come in warm and salt-heavy and uncomplicated. Carlo drove without music. She sat in the passenger seat and watched the darkness move. Somewhere on the coastal road, he said, "The team you're building, for both projects. What do you need first?" "A structural conservationist," she said. "Someone who's worked specifically with late 19th century Italian plasterwork. There are 3 people in the country worth talking to. I want to interview all 3. Elena will arrange it." "I'll arrange it," she said. "Elena can support, but the interviews are mine." A pause. "Of course," he said, and meant it. She could tell by now the difference between when he agreed because it was easier and when he agreed because he understood this was the second kind. "I also need someone who can manage client communication while I'm in the field," she said. "Someone I hire, someone who reports to me." "Done." "And I need an office," she said, "not the studio, something with space for the team, near the Meridionale." He didn't answer immediately. She turned to look at him. "The ground floor of the Meridionale building has a space that's been sitting empty for 2 years, he said. "I had it flagged when the acquisition closed." "Of course you did," she said. "Is that—" "It's fine," she said. "It's practical. I'm choosing to take it because it's practical." She paused. "I'm not choosing it because it puts me in your building." "I know," he said. "I need you to know that." "I know," he repeated. "Adriana, I understand the difference between what you choose because it makes sense and what you choose because of me. I am not confused about that distinction." She looked at him for a moment in the moving dark. "Most people would be, Ian," she said. "I'm not most people." "No," she said. "You're not." He pulled off the road at a point where the cliff edge was close and the water below was loud and present, black and glittering. They got out, stood at the railing. The wind came off the water and lifted her hair, and she let it because there was no one to perform compose for out here. No meeting, no contract, no document, no anonymous threat. Just the sea and the dark and a man standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him without them touching. I want to ask you something, she said. Ask. 6 months ago at the gallery, when I told that man his opinion was confidently wrong. She paused. What did you think in that moment? What actually went through your mind? He was quiet for a long time, longer than the question seemed to need. She waited. I thought, he said finally, that I had been in rooms full of people for 30 years, and I had never seen someone so completely unbothered by whether the room agreed with them. He paused. I thought I remember this clearly. There's a person who doesn't need permission. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had been in a room with someone like that. She kept her eyes on the water. You have more power than anyone in most of those rooms. That's different, he said. Power is external. What you had in that room was internal. You weren't unafraid. I could see that you were slightly terrified, but you said it anyway. He paused. That's not something you can power build or acquire. You either have it or you don't. She was quiet for a moment. I was terrified, she confirmed. That client was 3 months behind on payment, and I needed the invoice settled, and telling the gallery owner he was wrong was the single worst business decision I could have made in that room. But you did it. The palate was right, she said simply. He turned to look at her. She turned to look at him. The wind was doing something inconvenient with her hair, and she pushed it back, and he watched her do it with that expression, the unguarded one, the one that arrived before he could manage it, and neither of them looked away. I have something for you, he said. She blinked. Now, he reached into his jacket, pulled out something small, held it out to her in the dark. She looked at it. A key, old-fashioned heavy, the kind that belonged to a building rather than a door. She took it, turned it over in her hand. Palazzo Nord, he said. The main entrance. The project is officially yours. Both of them. He paused. I had the key made last week. I was waiting for the right moment. She looked at the key, felt its weight, the specific, solid, entirely unabstract weight of something real in her hand. 3 weeks ago, she had 47 euros in a parking spot she was refusing to surrender. Now she was holding a key to a building she was going to bring back from the dead. Carlo, she said. Yes. I'm going to need you to be very patient with me, she said. I don't move the way you do. I'm not built for the speed of this. I make decisions carefully, and I change my mind slowly, and I need to trust something for a long time before I'm comfortable saying that I trust it. I know, he said, and I'm going to make mistakes on these projects, she said. I'm going to get things wrong, and I need to be able to get them wrong without it becoming something between us. It won't, he said, and she stopped, looked at the key, then at him. I need whatever this is. She gestured between them, the same gesture she had used in the restaurant that first night that had changed meaning each time she used it. To be separate from the buildings. The work is the work. This is this. They can coexist, but they cannot be the same thing. He was quiet for a moment, then, I have never in my professional life mixed those two things with anyone. You mixed them with me from the beginning, she said. Yes, he said, because you were already in both places before I could separate them. You were in the building and in... He paused here, at the same time, from the atrium. He looked at her steadily. I don't think untangling them is possible at this point, but I think keeping them honest is. She thought about this. Keeping them honest, she said. What does that mean to you? It means that when I am your client, I behave as a client. When I am, he paused. Something else, I behave as that. And I don't use one to influence the other. And you think you can do that? I think, he said, that you will tell me immediately if I don't, and I think I will listen. She looked at him for a long moment. The wind, the water, the key in her hand warm now from her palm. Yes, she said, I will. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair from her face, the same gesture as her doorstep 3 weeks and a lifetime ago. His hand stayed this time, warm at the side of her face thumb, just below her cheekbone, and she let herself lean into it by approximately 1 millimeter, which was the distance that made the difference between holding back and choosing. Crazy, she said. We'll be crazy together. You said something like that once, the first night. I didn't say that, he said. You implied it. I implied it, he agreed, yes. She lifted her face to his, and he kissed her not urgently, not like a man who had been waiting, but like a man who understood the value of something and was not going to rush it. She kissed him back. The wind off the water came in around them, and she had a key in her hand that weighed like a beginning. And 3 weeks of her life had moved so fast she barely recognized the terrain. And none of that, not the speed, not the complication, not the entirely reasonable objections her practical mind kept filing. And she kept overruling. None of it made this feel like anything other than exactly right. They drove back to Naples in the kind of quiet that held things safely. He walked her to her door. She went up to her studio, sat down, and opened her laptop. The Palazzo Meridionale concept. The Palazzo Nord recovery draft. 14 pages of work she had done in the dark alone, running on instinct and the memory of a ruined corridor. She read through it now with different eyes, the eyes of a person who had the key in her jacket pocket and the team funding confirmed and both buildings waiting. She had been a freelancer with 47 euros, protecting a parking space with her whole body because it was the only ground she had that morning. She was still that woman. She was not interested in being any other woman. What had changed was not who she was, it was the size of the space she was allowed to be herself in. The scope of it, the reach. That was what he had done. She understood now. Not rescued her, not elevated her from outside herself. He had simply, and it was not simple, nothing about any of it had been simple, cleared enough ground that the full size of what she was already capable of had somewhere to stand. She picked up her phone, sent him one message. The atrium concept goes to the committee on Monday. I'm ready. His reply arrived in under a minute. I know. You've been ready. She set the phone down, looked at the document, looked at the key, which she placed on her desk, looked at the street below through her window, the cobblestones where it had all begun, where she had stood with her arms crossed and her coffee going cold and her 47 euros and her absolute refusal to move a single inch. She picked up the key, held it, felt the weight of what it meant, not just the building, not just the work, but everything that had assembled itself around the fact of a woman who would not be moved. She had not moved. And the world had moved around her, instead, had rearranged itself, had cracked open, had offered her things she hadn't known to ask for because she had never believed the asking would be heard. It had not been about the parking spot. It had never been about the parking spot. It had been about holding your ground when every reasonable calculation said to step aside, holding it not because you were certain you'd win, but because the ground was yours and some things you do not surrender, simply because surrender would be easier. Adriana Romano had known that all her life. She had simply finally found a world large enough to need it. She put the key in her jacket pocket where it would stay, opened the concept document, and with the city humming below and the work in front of her, and everything changed and nothing essential lost, she began.